It was made to look like a huge celebration of peace in the Middle East. But so far, it's just a ceasefire agreement to end the war that tore the world apart. The official name of this deal, signed last week in Egypt, is President Donald J. Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Hamas released all 20 of the living Israelis it was holding, and Israel released 2,000 of the 11,000 Palestinians it has been holding. Food, water, and medicine have finally started to trickle in, but not at the levels agreed to in the deal. The agreement has two more phases, but for now it's stuck in first gear, as Israeli forces have killed a number of Palestinians since the truce, and Israel argues that Hamas isn't doing enough to give back the remains of deceased Israeli captives. So what are the chances of getting to phase 2 or phase 3, and how real are the fears that everything could fall apart?
I think this is different. I think this is the end of the war with Hamas. The Qataris are bringing heavy machinery. This is just one small part of what needs to happen, as both sides have been accusing each other of breaking the ceasefire.
What do you find different in this deal that may make it more resilient?
Donald Trump is the big difference between this deal and every deal that happened.
But they're digging. They're actually digging. There are areas where they're digging and they're finding a lot of bodies. And some of them are under rubble. They have to remove rubble.
To me, it sounds like President Trump is sympathizing with the Hamas side of the equation, saying, give it time to work, move it forward. But it raises this interesting question of how fragile or how quickly each side is going to jump to declare the other one in violation of the treaty.
If the Americans want this to work, and apparently they want it to work, they're going to have to be engaged every single day, several times a day, to tell the mediators and to tell the parties, Israel and Hamas, that both sides are honoring the agreement. We had the United States come out officially saying that Hamas is not breaching the agreement, that Hamas doesn't have a forensic lab. They don't have the heavy machinery to dig under the rubble of buildings. This is going to take time. The experts are coming. They built an international mechanism into the agreement for the express purpose of making sure that Hamas is devoting 100% effort to do it. But we also have to understand that there may be bodies of the deceased hostages that will not be recovered. And to be a new Palestinian government instated for Gaza, a temporary government, immediately. There are 1,000 trained Palestinian police personnel who have been trained in Jordan and Egypt over the last months who are ready to be deployed the moment there's a new Palestinian government. For months, I was telling Hamas, since Trump entered the Oval Office, I was telling the leadership in Hamas that you need to understand you're not negotiating with Israel. Every time I raised a proposal and suggested something, their response would be, but Israel won't agree. And I kept telling them, you're not negotiating with Israel. Israel will say no to every proposal. Israel wants to continue the war. Netanyahu, his political survival is based on continuing the war. What I kept telling the Hamas leadership is, you have to imagine that you're sitting in the room across the table from Donald Trump. That's the person you're negotiating with. I kept telling the Hamas people, and I kept telling Witkoff, that the only way this war is going to end is when Donald Trump decides to end it. But about a week later, I got a message from Hamas saying that we can't trust the Americans. You told us that we have to negotiate with the Americans, that the Americans will guarantee the end of the war. If we release the hostages, Israel won't start it again. But how can we believe the Americans when they authorized the attack to kill us? And that was a very good point. And I relayed that back to the United States, back to Witkoff and his team. About a week later, something like that, Witkoff sent me a WhatsApp saying, we have a plan. And the plan was the 21 points that Trump, and then he ordered Netanyahu to come to Washington to the Oval Office after the Trump humiliated Benjamin Netanyahu and picked up the phone, gave the phone to Netanyahu, told him to call the Qatari prime minister and apologize. Trump completely scripted it, said every word that Netanyahu needed to say, turned to Bibi, to Netanyahu, and said, Bibi, the war is over. We're going to bring home all the hostages, but the war is over. You're going to end it now, and you're going to announce to the world that you agree to it.
This is the nature of Hamas.
Was willing to fight to the last Gazan. They would never surrender. It's not part of their DNA. It's not part of the way they think. It's not part of their religious beliefs. In their religious beliefs, the ultimate task in life is to die as a martyr for Palestine, for Allah, for Islam, etc. And then the problem was locking Hamas into the deal, and he gave Hamas a deadline. Hamas came back with the yes, but answer. Trump ignored the but and published on his Truth Social that Hamas said yes. And there will be an announcement very soon about the new Palestinian government and who's going to head it and how it's going to work. The deployment of 1,000 Palestinian troops that have been trained over months in Jordan and Egypt will happen soon. They will be supplemented by other people from Gaza who will be brought in. Gaza will be governed by the Gazans. There will be the Security Council resolution and the deployment of the multinational force that will be coming to Gaza. The money will start flowing. This peace board that Trump talked about that he's going to be heading and Tony Blair will be part of, and other leaders have already said that they will be part of. Witkoff described it to me as kind of a receivership of a bankrupt company. So It's not going to be governing Gaza, but they'll be dealing with the finance. We're talking about billions of dollars.
So will the aid flow in that equation? Will the aid flow in that equation? Will the IDF pull out?
When Witkoff talked about a receivership, I think they were talking mostly about managing the aid money that's going to come in for reconstruction. The international aid, the humanitarian aid, is already flowing into Israel, into Gaza more freely. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation disappeared. Basically, they're not there anymore, which is what Witkoff told me would happen. And it's going to go back to the international organizations. The Rafah crossing is being rebuilt. It's going to be reopened for movement in two directions. We have to push on the Egyptians to allow Palestinians from Gaza to have the same right to enter Egypt that every other person in the world does, because until now, the siege or the blockade on Gaza was implemented both by Israel and Egypt, and that can't continue. And the Rafah crossing needs to be a crossing for goods and people, not just for goods, so that everything doesn't have to go through Israel. There will be a European mechanism at the Rafah crossing on the Gaza side to monitor and inspect and make sure that weapons and materials for producing weapons are not coming into Gaza. And that goes back to an agreement that existed in 2005 called the Rafah Crossing Agreement, that involved the European Border Management Organization. So there'll be something remade like that, perhaps more robust, to ensure that there is no smuggling over that border. But all these things, as I said, these are a lot of moving pieces and they're all happening. You can call these phase two. There's also an American guarantee to Hamas that when all these mechanisms are down and working, the new government, the Palestinian Security, the international stability force, that Israel will be forced to withdraw from Gaza entirely. But my understanding is that there won't be Israeli soldiers stationed in Gaza when this process moves forward and those other pieces are put into place.